When the hunters arrived, they came from the darkest corners of the galaxy. The Valkyrie, apex predators who had evolved on a world where survival meant being faster, stronger, and more ruthless than anything else. Their massive biomechanical ships emerged silently above Earth's major cities on an ordinary Tuesday morning, casting mile-wide shadows that sent temperatures plummeting and birds scattering in panic. No warnings, no ultimatums, no demands for surrender. For the Valkyrie, Earth was just another hunting ground, humanity just another meal. They didn't consider us intelligent enough to negotiate with. In their eyes, we were livestock, and they had come to feast. The first wave hit Paris, Tokyo, and New York simultaneously. The Valkyrie warriors stood nearly 9 feet tall, covered in iridescent scales that shifted colors with their moods, battle red as they descended from their dropships. Their 6-fingered hands ended in retractable talons that could slice through steel, and their elongated faces housed 4 sets of jaws that opened in concentric circles of serrated teeth. They communicated through a series of clicks and subsonic rumbles that human ears could barely detect. They didn't bother with weaponry beyond what was integrated into their bodies. Toxic spines that could be launched from their forearms, enhanced strength that could topple buildings, and vision that could track the heat signature of a human through concrete walls. Dr. Evelyn Chen was working late in her biophysics lab at Columbia University when the attack began. Through her window, she watched in horror as one of the massive ships settled directly over Midtown Manhattan, its surface rippling like liquid metal. Within minutes, the streets filled with screams and the sounds of destruction. "Professor, what's happening?" Her graduate assistant, Marcus, stood frozen beside her, staring at the live news feed on his phone. The footage showed Paris in flames, the Eiffel Tower collapsing as flying Valkyrie warriors swarmed around it. "We need to get underground," Evelyn said, her scientific mind already cataloging details even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. "Gather whatever portable equipment you can, especially the spectrometers and the genetic sequencers." "But why would we need lab equipment?" Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Because understanding your enemy is the first step to defeating them." 3,000 miles away, in the remote highlands of Scotland, former British Special Forces Captain Raheem Jackson was watching the same news reports from his isolated cabin. He'd left military service 3 years earlier after a mission gone wrong in East Africa, a mission that had left him with a titanium leg and recurring nightmares. When his old commander called, the line was filled with static and panic. "Jackson, they've taken London. These things, they're not just killing people. They're harvesting them." "What do you mean, harvesting?" "They're selecting specific humans, healthy adults, taking them alive back to their ships. The rest, they're just slaughtering. Military response is in disarray. We need people who can organize resistance cells. People like you." Raheem closed his eyes, his hand automatically reaching for the locked cabinet where he kept his service weapons. "I'm not that man anymore, sir. None of us are who we were yesterday, son. But today, humanity needs every fighter it can get." The line went dead. Raheem stood motionless, watching as more news footage showed Valkyrie warriors systematically moving through residential areas, separating humans by some criteria only they understood. Some were killed immediately. Others were immobilized and dragged toward collection points where smaller shuttlecraft waited. His decision made itself. Within an hour, he was packed and headed toward what remained of Edinburgh, his old tactical mindset already planning how to gather intelligence on these invaders. The first week of the invasion saw traditional military responses fail spectacularly. Nuclear weapons were considered, but the Valkyrie ships had positioned themselves directly above population centers, making such options suicidal. Conventional weapons barely scratched their armor, and their warriors seemed almost impervious to bullets, their thick hides capable of sealing wounds almost instantly. Humanity was losing, and losing badly. But in Rio de Janeiro, something unexpected happened. A young street hacker named Gabriela Ortiz had managed to capture a damaged Valkyrie scout drone. Working with a former veterinarian and a university physics professor, she discovered something crucial. The Valkyrie weren't invincible after all. Their nervous system, she explained to the small group of survivors huddled in an abandoned subway station. It's similar to Earth's cephalopods, complex but centralized, and they communicate using infrasonic waves our ears can barely detect. But most importantly, she pointed to a scan of the drone's control systems. Their technology is biological, not mechanical. It's grown, not built. So what does that mean for us? Asked an exhausted police officer whose uniform was stained with blood not his own. Gabriella's eyes gleamed with the first hope anyone had felt in days. It means they can get sick. It means their ships can be infected. It means we might have weapons they never evolved to resist. By the end of the second week, scattered resistance groups began forming across the globe. Traditional command structures had collapsed, but in their place arose something the Valkyrie hadn't anticipated: human adaptability. In Delhi, survivors discovered that common microwave emissions at specific frequencies caused the Valkyrie severe disorientation. In Sydney, marine biologists weaponized a neurotoxin derived from cone snails that could penetrate Valkyrie scales. And in Chicago, Dr. Evelyn Chen's team had managed to decode enough of the Valkyrie biological signals to begin jamming their communications. Rahim Jackson had assembled a cell of fighters in the ruins of Manchester. They were a motley crew, ex-military, police officers, and ordinary citizens who'd been forced to become warriors overnight. They specialized in hit-and-run tactics, striking Valkyrie collection teams, and freeing captives before melting back into the urban landscape. They're hunters, Rahim explained during a strategy session. But they've never been hunted themselves. They expect fear, not resistance, and they certainly don't expect us to understand their biology. One of his fighters, a former entomologist named Sarah, nodded in agreement. Classic apex predator psychology. They've never needed to adapt because they've always been at the top. But that makes them predictable. And predictable means vulnerable. Rahim finished. The third week brought the first major human victory. Using information shared through a cobbled-together global resistance network, coordinated attacks hit Valkyrie harvesting operations in 12 major cities simultaneously. The resistance fighters employed sonic weapons that targeted the aliens' sensitive auditory systems and deployed weaponized bacteria specifically engineered to attack their biological technology. The Valkyrie responded with unprecedented brutality, leveling entire city blocks in retaliation. But something had changed. For the first time since their arrival, the hunters showed signs of confusion. Their formations became more defensive. They began traveling in larger groups. They were adapting, but so were we. Intercepted communications, translated by Dr. Chen's team, revealed something surprising. The Valkyrie were speaking about humans differently. No longer just prey or livestock. We had earned a new designation that roughly translated to dangerous food. It wasn't respect, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement. And for a species that had conquered dozens of worlds without significant resistance, it was unprecedented. By the end of the first month, Earth had become something the Valkyrie had never encountered before, a hunting ground where the hunters themselves were hunted. From her makeshift lab in the subway tunnels beneath New York, Evelyn Chen made perhaps the most crucial discovery yet. By analyzing tissue samples from fallen Valkyrie warriors, she identified a fundamental vulnerability in their cellular structure. They're perfectly adapted to their homeworld, she explained to Marcus as they examined holographic projections of Valkyrie DNA. But that specialization comes at a cost. Their immune systems are highly specific, evolved to counter the threats they knew. Earth is full of microorganisms they have no defense against. Marcus understood immediately. We don't need to defeat their warriors. We need to make Earth itself reject them. Evelyn nodded grimly. Exactly. And I think I know how we can accelerate the process. Meanwhile, in what remained of Berlin, Gabriela Ortiz had successfully hacked deeper into the Vicari communication network. What she found sent shockwaves through the resistance. Earth wasn't just another hunting expedition. It was something the Vicari called a seeding ground, a planet where they intended to establish permanent hatcheries for their young. The stakes had just become existential. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about preventing Earth from becoming permanently transformed into an alien breeding world. The information galvanized the global resistance. New tactics were developed, new weapons improvised. Humanity, pushed to the edge of extinction, was displaying the trait that had allowed our species to dominate our own world: relentless innovation. In Manchester, Rahim's fighters had developed ghost tactics, using the Vicari's own hunting instincts against them. They created heat signatures and sonic lures that drew the aliens into carefully prepared ambushes. Once engaged, the humans would attack not to kill but to wound, then disappear, leaving the injured Vicari for their companions to find. The psychological impact was devastating. The Vicari, used to being the apex predators, were experiencing something entirely new: fear. By the end of the 6th week, the tide had begun to turn. Human victories, while still costly, were becoming more frequent. The Vicari were losing warriors faster than they could deploy replacements. More importantly, Earth's microbiome was doing what Dr. Chen had predicted. The aliens were getting sick, their biological technology beginning to fail as Earth's microscopic life found ways to invade and corrupt it. The Vicari command ship, hovering over what had once been Beijing, sent a transmission that was intercepted and decoded by resistance communications experts. The message, sent to the Vicari homeworld, contained something unprecedented: a request for reinforcements. The hunters who had never known defeat were asking for help, and humanity, against all odds, was preparing to make sure that help would come too late. As the second month of the invasion began, the scattered resistance groups prepared for a coordinated global offensive. Using Dr. Chen's biological agents, Gabriela's hacked intelligence, and tactics developed by fighters like Rahim, they were ready to strike at the heart of the Vicari operation. The prey had become the predators, and the real battle for Earth was about to begin. When the hunted became the hunters, the Vicari High Commander Thrazek stood on the observation deck of the flagship, his scales shifting through shades of agitated purple as he watched the holographic battle reports. Behind him, his 2 sub-commanders maintained a respectful distance, their own coloration carefully neutral. "Explain," Thrazek said, his voice a rumble of subharmonics that vibrated the deck plates, "how prey animals have disabled 3 harvester ships in the past solar cycle." Neither sub-commander rushed to answer. To speak first was to claim responsibility. To claim responsibility for failure was to invite consequences. Finally, the older of the 2, his scales bearing the gold-flecked pattern of a veteran of 17 conquest worlds, stepped forward. "High Commander, these creatures are anomalous. They lack the proper fear response. When cornered, rather than freezing or fleeing as proper prey should, they become more dangerous." Thrazek's inner eyelids flickered, the Vicari equivalent of contemptuous disbelief. "They are soft-bodied. Their teeth are flat. Their claws non-existent. They require artificial coverings for thermal regulation. They are the definition of prey." And yet, the sub-commander continued carefully, "They have learned to turn our own hunting methods against us. The incident in the territory they call Manchester resulted in the loss of 28 prime warriors." Thrazek turned, his massive frame casting a shadow over his subordinate. "How?" "The prey created false heat signatures, mimicking their wounded. When our hunting party approached, the ground beneath collapsed into a chamber filled with a chemical agent that appears to be toxic specifically to our respiratory system. It was precisely calculated." For the first time in his long and bloody career, Thrazek felt something unfamiliar twist in his gut, the faintest hint of doubt. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Dr. Evelyn Chen had transformed her underground laboratory into a biological warfare production facility. What had begun with simple observations about Vicary vulnerability to Earth microorganisms had evolved into a sophisticated program to accelerate those vulnerabilities. "The latest batch is ready," she told Marcus as they carefully sealed containers of what appeared to be ordinary water. "The modified bacteriophage should target their communication biotech specifically. Once it infects their systems, they'll be functionally deaf to each other's signals." Marcus nodded, carefully packing the containers for transport. "The distribution teams are ready. If we can get this into their water reclamation systems on the primary ships, we could disrupt their command structure within days." Evelyn looked at her former student with a mixture of pride and sadness. Like everyone who had survived the first brutal weeks of the invasion, Marcus had been transformed. The eager academic was still there, but now tempered with a hardness that came from seeing too much death, from making too many difficult choices. "This isn't what you signed up for when you joined my research team, is it?" she asked quietly. Marcus paused, his hand steady on the biohazard container. "None of us signed up for this, Professor, but we're the right people, in the right place, at the right time. How many biologists get to save their entire species?" Across the globe, similar scenes were playing out as humanity marshaled its most potent weapon, our ability to communicate, collaborate, and share innovation across vast distances. In a repurposed automotive factory in Detroit, engineers had reverse-engineered enough Vicary technology to create sonic disruptors that could incapacitate the aliens' sensitive auditory systems. In Mumbai, a pharmaceutical company had retooled its production lines to mass-produce Dr. Chen's biological agents. And in Santiago, Chile, a team led by Gabriela Ortiz had achieved the impossible. They had fully cracked the Vicary communication protocols. "It's not just a tactical advantage," Gabriela explained to the resistance leadership during a secure global conference call. "We can now insert false commands into their network. We can send their harvesters to the wrong locations, direct their warriors into ambushes, even trigger emergency protocols on their ships." Raheem Jackson, joining the call from his mobile command center in the Scottish Highlands, leaned forward. "How certain are you that they won't detect the intrusion?" Gabriela's face, thin and exhausted, but animated with fierce intelligence, filled the screen. "Their entire system is based on absolute hierarchy. Lower ranks don't question orders from above. They've never needed to encrypt their communications because they've never faced an enemy capable of intercepting them. Their arrogance is our opportunity." The global counteroffensive began 3 days later, coordinated with a precision that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. As Vicary harvest teams descended on what they believed to be concentrations of human refugees in Johannesburg, they instead found empty buildings rigged with electromagnetic pulse devices that fried their biological tech. In Moscow, resistance fighters released Chen's engineered microorganisms into the ventilation systems of grounded Vicary shuttles. And in orbit, a cobbled-together human spacecraft, built from salvaged Vicary parts and piloted by a multinational crew of former astronauts, managed to attach a parasitic device to one of the main Vicary carriers, broadcasting false commands throughout their fleet. The Vicary, for the first time in their long history of interstellar predation, were experiencing confusion on a massive scale. Their hierarchical command structure, once a strength, became a critical vulnerability as contradictory orders flooded their networks. On the flagship, High Commander Thrazak raged as reports of failures cascaded in from all fronts. "How are they coordinating these attacks?" he demanded, his scales now a livid crimson of fury. "They have no central government. Their military infrastructure is destroyed. They should be scattered and leaderless." His intelligence officer, a young but promising warrior who had specialized in studying prey behavior, ventured a response. "High Commander, they appear to be using their global information network. The system is decentralized, redundant, and virtually impossible to fully disable without destroying the planet's resource value. Then we will target their leaders, find their command centers." "That's just it, sir," the intelligence officer continued, mandibles twitching nervously. They don't seem to have a traditional command structure. Different resistance cells operate independently, but share information freely. When we eliminate one group, 3 more adapt their tactics based on what happened. They're learning collectively. Threzak's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of deep disturbance. This wasn't how prey was supposed to behave. Prey ran. Prey hid. Prey did not coordinate global counteroffensives against apex predators. But the worst was yet to come. 3 days into the counteroffensive, the first Valkyrie warriors began showing symptoms of a mysterious illness. It began with disorientation and progressed rapidly to respiratory distress as their breathing sacs failed. Within a week, thousands of warriors were incapacitated, their bodies betrayed by microscopic Earth organisms that had been weaponized by Dr. Chen's team. More alarming still, the biological components of their ships, the semi-sentient navigation systems, the living circuitry that regulated life support, began to deteriorate as engineered bacteriophages spread through their systems. In her underground lab, Evelyn Chen monitored the progress of her microscopic army with grim satisfaction. The beauty of it, she explained to the resistance leadership, is that these pathogens evolve. Even if the Valkyrie develop countermeasures, the bacteria will adapt faster than they can respond. Earth itself is rejecting them. For Rahim Jackson and his fighters, the shift in Valkyrie behavior was immediately apparent. The aliens were now moving in defensive formations, eschewing the lone hunter approach that had characterized their early attacks. When engaged by human forces, they often retreated rather than pressing the attack, a concept so foreign to their psychology that it caused visible confusion among their ranks. "They're afraid," Sarah, the entomologist-turned-warrior, observed during a scouting mission. "Look at their posture, the way they're constantly looking over their shoulders. They're experiencing predator stress for the first time." Rahim nodded, watching through high-powered binoculars as a Valkyrie patrol moved hesitantly through the ruins of a shopping center. And fear makes you make mistakes. The patrol walked directly into the trap his team had set, a simple but effective ambush that left all 6 aliens dead or captured, with no human casualties. By the end of the 3rd month, the Valkyrie had lost control of the ground war entirely. Their forces were withdrawn to the relative safety of their ships, which now hovered defensively high in the atmosphere rather than maintaining their intimidating positions over major cities. But the respite was temporary. Humanity had tasted victory and had no intention of stopping until the invaders were driven from Earth completely. The final phase of the counteroffensive targeted the Valkyrie command ships directly. Using Gabriella's hacked access to their networks, resistance forces coordinated simultaneous attacks on key vessels around the globe. Teams equipped with portable versions of Dr. Chen's biological weapons infiltrated the massive ships, introducing their deadly cargo directly into the semi-living systems that kept the vessels functioning. The results were catastrophic for the Valkyrie. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds began to fail as their biological components succumbed to Earth's engineered pathogens. Life support systems malfunctioned. Navigation became unreliable. And perhaps most devastating of all, the ship-to-ship communication network that maintained their fleet cohesion dissolved into static. Aboard his flagship, High Commander Threzak faced the unthinkable: defeat. More than half his fleet was disabled or compromised. His warrior ranks were decimated by disease and combat losses. And the prey, the simple, soft-bodied prey that should have been easy harvest, continued to attack with increasing coordination and effectiveness. When the ship's biological core began showing signs of infection, Threzak made the decision that would forever change his species' understanding of the galaxy. "Prepare for emergency departure," he ordered, his voice lacking its usual dominance harmonics. "We withdraw from this world." His sub-commander stared in shock, mandibles slack. Withdraw? Without completing the harvest? Without establishing the breeding grounds? Threzak's scales rippled with a complex pattern that had no direct translation but conveyed something between resignation and newfound respect. "This is not a harvest world," he said finally. We were wrong. These creatures, these humans, they are not prey. As the Valkyrie flagship prepared for emergency atmospheric departure, a small craft approached it from below. Piloted by Gabriela Ortiz and carrying a team that included both Dr. Chen and Rahim Jackson, the cobbled-together vessel represented humanity's desperate final gambit. "We'll have one shot at this," Rahim told the others as they approached the massive alien ship. "The package has to be delivered directly to their biological core, or it won't spread quickly enough." Dr. Chen clutched a container holding her most aggressive engineered pathogen, one designed not just to disable but to completely break down Valkyrie biological technology at the cellular level. "If this works," she said quietly, "it should render their entire fleet inoperable within hours. The spores will transmit from ship to ship through their communication channels." Gabriela, her attention focused on piloting their craft through the Valkyrie's deteriorating defensive screen, allowed herself a grim smile. "Poetic justice. They came to consume us, and instead, we're consuming them from the inside out." The mission succeeded, but at a terrible cost. Of the 6-person team that boarded the Valkyrie flagship, only Rahim and one other fighter returned. Dr. Chen remained behind to ensure the pathogen was properly dispersed, sacrificing herself in the process. Gabriela's fate remained unknown. Her last communication reported success before cutting off mid-sentence, but their sacrifice changed the course of the war. Within hours, the engineered pathogen had spread throughout the Valkyrie fleet, transmitted through the very biological communication channels that were their technological pride. Systems failed cascadingly. Ships lost power and drifted. Some attempted emergency departures, only to fail catastrophically in the upper atmosphere. By dawn the next day, humanity looked up to see something unprecedented. The Valkyrie flagship, burning as it climbed desperately for orbit, trailing biological debris that glowed like dying fireflies in the morning light. 3 vessels, all that remained of the once mighty invasion fleet, managed to break atmosphere and limp away from Earth, carrying with them a message that would soon spread through the stars. Earth was not a harvest world. Humans were not prey. And any predator foolish enough to try again would meet the same fate. In the months that followed, Earth began the long process of rebuilding. The cost had been catastrophic. Billions dead, cities destroyed, ecosystems damaged. But humanity had not only survived. It had prevailed against an enemy that had never known defeat. From the recovered Valkyrie technology, humans gleaned new understanding of the galaxy beyond our solar system. We learned that the universe was indeed full of life, much of it catalogued in Valkyrie records as either prey species or non-viable. We discovered that the Valkyrie were feared throughout multiple star systems as unstoppable apex predators. And we learned that we were the first species to ever drive them back. 2 years after the invasion, a memorial was unveiled in what had once been the United Nations Plaza in New York. It featured a simple stone monolith with names, millions of names, too many to read in a lifetime, of those who had fallen. But at its base was an inscription that had become humanity's new credo, a phrase that captured what the invasion had taught us about ourselves. We came from prey, but we are predators no longer. We are something new. We are human, and we are not alone. Far across the galaxy, the 3 surviving Valkyrie ships limped home, carrying with them a warning that would change their species forever. Earth was to be marked in their star charts, not as a harvest world, but with a new designation they had never before needed to use. Predator world, approach at risk of extinction. And in the vast darkness between stars, word began to spread among other spacefaring species. There was a small blue world, circling an unremarkable yellow star, where the mighty Valkyrie had gone to hunt, and instead had become the hunted. There was a species of soft-skinned, flat-toothed omnivores who had done what no other species had managed. They had turned the galaxy's apex predators into prey. Humanity's reputation was born among the stars, and it was not as conquerors or as victims, but as something far more interesting, Survivors who had earned their place in the cosmic hierarchy, not through natural weaponry or evolutionary advantages, but through intelligence, cooperation, and a stubborn refusal to accept extinction. We had been tested in fire and had emerged stronger, and the universe was watching.